Russia, with its 17 million square kilometers of territory, is the world's largest country and a global issue. If Russia fails due to the Ukraine war, it will be our issue too, including you. What may happen? Find out now. Fading Russian power image. Marching soldiers, aircraft, tanks, armored vehicles, and intercontinental ballistic missiles often pass an enraptured throng and its leaders. It was different this year. The Kremlin cut back heavily. There was no flyover, no Iskanders, and 3,000 fewer soldiers, mostly cadets and military university students. A single WW2 T-34 tank passed the reviewing stand instead of T-90Ms and T-14R Martyrs. Putin's tank losses in Ukraine make this T-34 seem like the bottom of the barrel. As of May 2023, Russia has lost 1,137 tanks in Ukraine, including 192 in the First Chechen War, 23 in the Second, and 3 in the Russo-Georgian War. Those are the visually confirmed numbers. Let that sink in. Russia has more tanks, but most of them and most of its military forces are in Ukraine, explaining the less military parade presence than in the past. Considering the recent drone scare above the Kremlin, this year's parade was held despite strategic red flags and security concerns inconceivable a year ago. Some argue the event to catch the public's imagination and promote Soviet-era militaristic nationalism is just covering up Russia's military weaknesses. Many of these exist. Ironically, the Russian military last won a significant war 78 years ago during World War II. Operations in Ukraine are following a Russian pattern of strategic overstretch and humiliating pullback. Weakenings are indicating greater dangers to Putin's regime. Yevgeny Prigozhin, leader of the Wagner mercenary squad operating around Bakhmut in Ukraine, recently accused the Kremlin of not delivering enough weapons to the front. He posted on social media that Victory Day is our grandfather's victory. We didn't deserve that triumph. No one should be surprised that victory is unlikely. Some foresee worse for Putin's military and political future due to economic sanctions and the Russian Federation's deteriorating finances. Could Putin's regime collapse with less to be optimistic about than at any other stage in the war? What might that look like? The Atlantic Council surveyed 167 foreign policy professionals, and 46% predicted Russia's downfall in 10 years. 40% thought this would happen internally due to a revolution, civil war, or governmental breakdown. We all know that bad wars accelerate social decay quicker than anything else. After the Cold War, the USSR collapsed. Putin's disastrous war strategy in Ukraine could lead to Russia's obscurity, oblivion, or collapse. When discussing a Russian governmental collapse, we usually cite two major historical events, which is saying something. At the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed. This collapse surprised everyone, in case you're too young to remember. A kingdom so huge and powerful on paper collapsed quickly, shocking many. Some blame the West's response to that geopolitical moment for Russia's current situation. A new era of democracy, liberation, and self-determination was hailed, but many worried the independence of many ex-Soviet satellites and Russia's decline would disrupt the world order. Since the 1990s, all 21 Soviet republics declared independence. Putin, an imperialist who misses the past, took this hard. After he took office, the West strove to preserve good relations with the Kremlin while pursuing a repressive imperialist foreign policy in the Second Chechen War, the 2008 invasion of Georgia, and the 2014 invasion of Ukraine. Putin's dictatorship has deliberately restricted the rights of dozens of national and ethnic groups in modern Russia since the Cold War. He aspires to be a czar with a wheel of satellites for natural resources, labor, and money. This agenda is promoted by Russian leaders and Kremlin propagandists to make the ruthless look benign. Who knows, Russian imperial aggression may soon target Moldova, Kazakhstan, and other Central Asian nations. How would it affect European security? Thus, Ukraine matters. The battle there threatens Putin's imperial ambitions. He and his ministers believed it would be a brief war that would permanently reunite Ukraine with Russia. Instead, he is suffering one of the worst military setbacks of the past century, one that has already surpassed the Russo-Japanese War of 1905 and is approaching the scale of the suffering that preceded the other major Russian collapse, the Tsarist Empire's collapse in 1917. In case you forgot, the first time the Russian Federation disintegrated sparked Russia's chaotic, deadly plunge into Soviet-era communism. It was a frenzy to be alive. You become a Russian soldier fighting Germany and Austro-Hungary with Entente allies on the Eastern Front. Next, you learn the incompetent and corrupt Tsarist administration cannot afford the war's economic and material expenditures. Before long, tens of thousands of soldiers, workers, and peasants were fed up and toppled the imperial government, establishing the Bolsheviks. In those chaotic times, many Russian minorities sought respect and freedom which the Tsars had denied them. When the empire collapsed after the war, social, economic, and socio-political ruptures ended central state control and allowed the temporary formation of new polities, including the Siberian Republic and other former territories that gained their first taste of independence. Finland, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The Soviets soon reabsorbed them, cementing state power under the communist flag of the USSR. You wonder why they eagerly joined NATO after the Cold War. Most experts expect a modern Russian collapse to be faster, bloodier, and more like the 1917 revolution than the 1991 Soviet fall. Possible scenario: Russian conditions today resemble those of the Tsarist Empire at its fall. The morally bankrupt ruling class of oligarchs, aristocrats, and elites has no idea of the masses' economic hardship. In Putin's wars, ethnic minorities in Dagestan, Ichkeria, Ingushetia, Ossetia, Kabardino, the Caucasus, Tuva, Buryatia, and others are mistreated and exploited as cannon fodder. A demographically declining population. Mistrust of Russian institutions and government grows. Heavy state repression, a nation that will owe billions or trillions to restore Ukraine. You're foolish to think one thing will bring Putin down. Non-linear, multi-causal, contingent history. Failed State, A Guide to Russia's Rupture, author Yanis Bagashvili said, "The demise of the existing Russian Federation is unlikely to follow a single path, unlike the Soviet Union, where 15 republics went independent almost by default. The state's breakdown will likely be chaotic, lengthy, sequential, conflictive, and violent. It can split some federal divisions and merge others into new federal or confederal systems." Institute Montaigne geopolitical advisor Bruno Tertrace said the sole benefit of a Russian collapse now is that the nuclear issue would be much less catastrophic than with the Soviet Union. Elites would choose to maintain some control and authority rather than commit political and personal death by initiating a nuclear assault. Russia has most of its nuclear forces inside the country, unlike during the Cold War when it had 7,000 nukes abroad. Bruno said that the Soviet Union was defined as a upper volta with rockets in the 1970s, which could affect Russia's nuclear future. The 2000s saw Mexico with nuclear weapons, a nuclear-armed petrol station in the 2010s. Will it become a nuclear Somalia? How might Russia fall? How will it affect neighbors? We know that domestic conditions affect international policy and vice versa. Russia's economic collapse. Putin is steering Russia toward an economic crisis, with state deficits reaching annual highs within the first 2 months of 2023 and crude oil prices hitting historic lows. Despite increased hydrocarbon sales to India and China, profits remain minimal, while GDP has fallen by 4%. Import sales are declining, and air cargo plummeted by 60% in 2022. The exodus of foreign enterprises has left Russia without critical technical expertise and essential equipment such as semiconductors. The war in Ukraine has exposed and exacerbated systemic weaknesses. Russia's economy and military are increasingly rudimentary, relying heavily on China for resources and technology, a process that is neither swift nor seamless. Rising poverty, strained healthcare access, and growing public discontent threaten to destabilize the Kremlin's oligarch-controlled system. Regional elites, long dependent on Moscow's political and economic strength, could turn towards separatist movements if federal support wanes. Historical precedents like the 1917 collapse of the Tsarist Empire underscore the potential for fragmentation. Chechnya, with a history of Kremlin animosity, could spearhead a cascade of separatist actions. Figures like Kadyrov and disillusioned Wagner mercenaries may exploit cracks in Putin's power, potentially forming alliances against him. However, experts caution that Russia is unlikely to fracture along administrative borders due to shared socio-political and economic foundations. Putin faces mounting challenges ahead of the 2024 elections. Sustaining his regime will require suppressing rising unrest, but this only deepens the cycle of resistance. The ongoing war, paired with economic strain, risks accelerating Russia's internal decay. Though Putin seeks battlefield victories to secure his dominance, the cost of his strategy, both economic and human, continues to rise, threatening the stability of his centralized rule. Rising hostilities and complicated strategic considerations indicate a power transition. Will this change Russia's fate? Share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on foreign military assessments, like and subscribe to the channel. See you next video.